we now welcome on a very, very, very special guest. He has been a personal lifesaver of mine for his unbelievable service as the owner of Canary Coffee Bar at 720 Old World 3rd Street when I desperately needed a place off campus to get some schoolwork done. He opened the shop less than 2 years ago, August 2019. He is Mr. Colin Whitcomb. Colin, thanks so much for taking a couple of minutes. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Love to.
Of course, and a word of thanks for the summer, for being such a friendly presence for me, because Lord knows when it was the thick of the pandemic, and by the time this comes out, it will be a little bit more of a more open atmosphere. Hopefully, we hope, but there were some dark times where some places weren't open for indoor seating, as especially in Milwaukee, and your place being open, just as a word of thanks for me personally, that was huge.
Yeah, we were happy to have you then. I think it was around August you probably started coming, something like that.
Maybe even earlier. I came into the city late June, beginning of July. So when I needed a place to get work, you were there.
I can't really remember when we started letting people sit in again. I guess whenever the city said we could is when we did. So whenever that was.
So has it been just a whole blur, this pandemic? How is, obviously we can get into how much your business has changed and how you plan to, or how you have plans to combat the challenges of the pandemic, as you chuckle a little bit.
Yes, it's a blend and blur. It's been a crazy blur, and to look back on it all, just even that comment about what was happening in the summer feels like a very long time ago. It does, but I don't know. I think that in a way it's been taking it day by day. So when you do that, it's when you look back, it's easy to see how far you've come.
It's a good sentimental reminder. We're taping this on March 26th, though. This will be, I guess, far away from the summer whenever you're listening to this. Colin Whitcomb joining me. Just zoom back from 2020 and 2021. I know it seems like the longest year on earth. Back to Canary's beginnings. So I mentioned it started in 2019. How did it start in your mind? Do you remember those days?
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, we founded basically the company in June, I think, of 2018 was when I got the LLC and was writing the business plan. So it's been about 3 years, I guess, since we first started talking about doing it. I had come back to Milwaukee in the fall of 2017 after being away for maybe about 6 years. And for most of that time, I had been obsessed with the retail concept in specialty coffee, and was obsessed with the idea that it needed to change, that we needed to move away from fixed point of sale and other things like that. So when I came back to Milwaukee, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with myself. I had been working for coffee roasters ever since I started working in coffee, and I had sort of tried to do that again, but I had also developed this really progressive view for what I thought specialty coffee should be, and I didn't really see anybody in Milwaukee doing that. After kind of kicking a couple ideas around for a little while, I was convinced that there was space and that the market would respond to an interesting and different retail concept. That there wasn't really space in the market, or that it would be very challenging in this market to become a coffee roaster, because it's typically been the case that success as a coffee roaster has been seen by reaching a wholesale audience, right? People want to get into other people's coffee shops. They want to get into grocery stores. It's a huge fight. Or these other private label things where you roast the coffee but somebody else sells it under their brand. And because there's a lot of old legacy, sort of 30, 25-year-old coffee companies here, it's just really difficult to break into that market. They're really successful, and they've been really successful. And so, I think I just sort of described this business as being the last good idea that I had left. It was like we had a small amount of capital to put into something, and then I had told somebody like, hey, you have some money, I have some money, like, why don't we do like a tasting room, we'll build it into something. And they told me like, yeah, I'm not interested in doing that. And I was like, okay. And then, yeah, one night my wife turned to me and said like, why don't we open our own coffee shop? And I was like, I literally have been thinking the exact same thing. And so like, okay, like, yeah, let's try to do it. Why not, So that's kind of how it started, just like being in a place in my life where I didn't necessarily know like where I was going to do, but I had invested probably a dozen years in specialty coffee by that time. And it's not like I was really going to, I didn't really necessarily want to go back and do something else, whatever that would be. Right.
Right.
So yeah, that's how it all started. And then I think we got funded, like an initial sort of round of funding. We did have to sort of fundraise a little bit more after that in like October of 2018. So maybe what was that, like 8 or 9 months after? So something like that.
It's funny that you mentioned sort of your beginnings with trying to create something new, because I mean that's what I admire about you, and I think this whole shop as we do this interview on location is that just creating the bar experience. And we've talked about this before when I've been here, just as a loyal customer, but to be able to kind of, and it's been written before, portrayed before as sort of the Cheers of coffee, at least in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. But you'll have to point me to that review.
I think from the top of my head, I want to give a shout out to April Larson from Coffee Blogger Milwaukee.
That. Sure,
I believe, and she will actually be featured in this as well. So
cool.
She took a good chunk of her time out to talk to me, and I appreciate it, April. Shout out, and I know she's a big fan. But just from cheers to her. But just creating that bar experience, a coffee bar is not, as we've talked about, a necessarily, unoriginal. It is an original concept, and I think it's something that you don't see a lot in Milwaukee. Was that one of your original plans or ideas?
Well, I would, I don't take any credit for doing a coffee bar thing as being an idea that I had or anything like that. I think I've really tried to divest myself of that because I feel like it has more power and impact if it's not seen as special and unique, but rather seen as this ordinary thing that you get anywhere else, almost everywhere else, but for some reason, like specialty coffee, hasn't wanted to give that to you. So I guess that's the sort of the way that I've tried to see it anyways. But around 2011 or 2012, this guy who's become really, he was famous then, but he's insanely famous now. His name is James Hoffman. He has a YouTube channel with well over millions of subscribers, and he's become one of the world's most looked to voices in specialty coffee. He gave this talk at the Specialty Coffee Association Symposium, where he basically argues all the same things that I argue now. So I think his talk had a lot to do with it, but he was quick to point out in that talk that basically most coffee shops had done a fast food service model, where you would line up and you would sort of go to a register and you move past something, whatever, and you would wait for a number or something like that. But that's how the coffee shops wanted to serve it to you. And I don't really remember necessarily what else he was saying. I think he made some comparisons about going to a great whiskey bar and the way that they treated you and how you could ask dumb questions at a whiskey bar and it was cool. It was cool. Nobody chortled at you. Nobody scoffed at you. And really briefly, he and his business partner did this concept in London called Penny University, which was sort of a play on the old London coffee shops were known as these penny universities because there was this intellectual exchange that happened there, but the coffee was 1 copper. And but they had done like a bar style service with maybe 8 seats, incredibly small, with filter coffee only, or as they would say in Europe, filter only. What we would think of as just like a drip coffee here.
Right.
And they opened it in, I think maybe for the 2011 like World Barista Championship was in London. So they had done that, and it seemed really cool. And then I had partaken in a couple of these different coffee services at TED under this group called Coffee Common that like did a bar style kind of service at these coffee at the TED conferences. And so I think those things really made me want to try to like do that. I was convinced at that point that like we were losing out by continuing to make people line up.
It's an interesting observation, obviously, and I think another one that I've thought about, and I know you've mentioned it before, is coffee shops becoming more and more of a workspace. I have guys who I live with, shout out to Zach and Brian, who are my best friends, and they are real estate majors at Marquette, and they are looking at different uses for different properties and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And the coffee shop becoming more of a workspace, especially since the onset of the pandemic. Do you think that will become more of a community type office space, either for your shop or for general coffee culture?
Well, it's very difficult to read the tea leaves on how work is going to change for people going forward or not. I think that regardless of any trends necessarily and like how work stuff's going to go, because I don't know about that, like we just already know that increasingly, like, and I think more and more so going forward, like people live alone. They live alone for longer, right? So in that sort of way, like the coffee shop and the coffee space becomes a place where people go to do something, to be with other people instead of just by themselves, to meet people. So I kind of think that the coffee space will have a lot of future as both of those things. And yeah, I don't know. I'm asked all the time about like, oh, will I do a second location, or approached all the time by commercial brokers being like, oh, have you thought about a second location? I have ideas for you. And I think, what those ideas will look like for people is like, I don't know. It's really tough to say. Right. I think that it looks to me like those coffee shops that have been located in a neighborhood where people live, a residential neighborhood, have been really successful, comparatively speaking, because like people are working from home, it's close to them. I think people that have been more of a destination spot downtown, locations in the third ward would be something that I would point to, have had a lot harder time. So I don't know. I would guess that some people are going to work more from coffee shops, and that we're going to continue to be more of that. But I think that would only be good for us, because people who want to work in a coffee shop like want to come in and like just relax. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's almost better for most people that if they can just like look at their email for a second and then think about a coffee order after that. I find that a lot of people like really just like are like looking to get like just like, let me take a breath and center myself, and then I'll think about what needs to happen, so I think it's nice that we're able to accommodate that by being like, no, you can just go sit down. Right.
I couldn't agree more. It's a good sort of life philosophy that I know you have plenty of, that can't really plan for some things, which I've learned along the way as well.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. We try to be flexible to that, I think. When we first opened, I was really focused, like almost hyper-focused on like getting people to do this particular thing. Like if you're gonna like drink here, you have to go sit, you have to wait for me to come, you have to wait for me to take an order from you where you are, because like that's the best way to do it. And if you don't, like I'll be upset. And now I think we're a little better at just kind of being like, the beauty of it is that it never has to go any way at all. Like if a person's like, I'm ready to pay this, that, and the other, and they didn't finish their drink yet, they didn't even get their drink yet, sometimes they'll be like, yes, that's cool, 100%. Let's just finish it. Let's just finish it now. We don't have to like force you to pay when we, so I think that flexibility is certainly nice.
Talking to Colin Whitcomb, this is the next one that I'm trying to, for the most part, center this project around. You're a Wisconsin native. What does Milwaukee have in terms of being a coffee city? Because we were just talking about this off the air, the mix between brew city when it comes to beer versus brew city when it comes to coffee. There was a study done by Wallet Hub. I want to get their credential right, even though I disagree with their findings, that Milwaukee was ranked the 87th best coffee city in America in 2020. So you're laughing as we're on camera here. Do you have a response to that? How is it, can it change? Do you think the national perception can be swayed anytime soon?
What's it called? Wallet what?
Wallet Hub. I believe it's a travel website.
It's so fascinating.
As we go on.
I'd love to know like how they measure any of those things. But I think it's always sort of when you work in coffee, especially in the retail side, you see publications all the time publish like, these are the 50 best coffee shops in America. This is the best coffee shop in every state in America. Right. And there's always ones where you just think like, I really don't know what they're looking at. Like who went there? Like how do they figure that this was like one of the better coffee shops? And of course, a lot of times you're thinking like, we put so much effort into our coffee shop. Like why weren't we in there? But I think that beyond that sort of query, like how did somebody come to decide something like that? Like it's a really interesting, and the place to put a city that is so big at such a low place on that list makes no sense to me. And I think, in a certain kind of way, like the comparison that I would make with Milwaukee and other coffee cities in America is sort of the comparison that I would make between like Australian coffee and American coffee, where like there's a lot of like pretty good, maybe like even better than pretty good, but not like blow your socks off amazing coffee in Australia. Like it's almost impossibly easy to stumble across like a really good, decent coffee there. Whereas in America, like it's this huge differentiation where you could like get the best and the worst, and you just don't know. But in Milwaukee, like more often than not, you're gonna get something that's like kind of like that. You're gonna get this like C+, B-, B coffee that's like really consistent and a mid to low grade specialty coffee. So there's that. What else would I say about that? I think that there's a lot to be said about the way that certain coffee companies have marketed themselves, right? I think that there's been a tendency in this market for the larger coffee roasters to market themselves in this very, very blue collar kind of everyman way. And it doesn't leave somebody who's not from Milwaukee, probably especially, thinking like, look, it doesn't impress you with its sexiness, its modernness. They don't make outrageous claims about super high quality. They make no outrageous claims about direct trade. And I would remind people that like almost all of the claims that the fancy roasters in other markets make about direct trade or quality, like nobody verifies those. Those are not verified by a third party. Those are just marketing claims that they use to talk about how great their product is. So I think, that's an idea that I just had, but I think probably has a lot to do with why I think there isn't a perception of being awesome coffee here. So, in fact, it almost seems like the roasters here have felt like if they don't market their coffee as having this like everyman appeal, like they'll be afraid that people won't come, like we have to have something that every single person can come in here and drink. So, but it's also, I think, in that way, part of the generational style of it, right? All the coffee roasters that opened in the 90s basically said like, what's Starbucks and Pete's doing? We can do that on our own local market here and push them out because people would prefer to have a local product. And so they're sort of like stuck maybe like doing this thing. And it's like they started doing that. And like I was saying to somebody earlier, like for them to continue to be perceived as like the best nationally, like these brands have to almost continually reinvent themselves. You know, some people saw that spot early, like Stumptown and Intelligentsia, and were able to kind of like hold that, oh, we're having very high quality, this is the best coffee in America. But I think they had to do so much work to kind of like continue to find those new coffees and do stuff like that. So I don't know. All thoughts.
All thoughts. And the thought that a close friend of yours, I know, Scott Lucy from Wonder Say Coffee here in Milwaukee, had in my interview with him was that it just deserves more of a perception because of the number of roasters that are in the city. And it sounds like you're taking it to that next level, talking about, you know, how they market themselves. Mm-hmm. Are they marketing themselves as as you said, sort of common man type brand?
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's more of there obviously has to be a little bit of nuance with how every brand market themselves. There's not a, you know, one size fits all type.
No, absolutely, right? Absolutely not. But I just think, I don't know, I think the more I think about this like 87th in the country thing, the more I think it's like, it's really tough to understand. Like, I've been to most of the major cities in the country and had coffee at multiple locations in most of the major cities in the country, and like places like Kansas City. Like there's nothing in Kansas City that's better than anything in Milwaukee. You know what I mean? There's nothing in there's nothing, not one single roaster in Minneapolis that's better than anything in Milwaukee. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. I think when you're in the industry and you look at like coffee roasters, to me, everyone's pretty much the same, where they've got a couple of great coffees and like most of them are fine, and then there's a couple that you wonder why they're still serving. Right? So yeah, I don't know.
No one knows, I guess.
Yeah.
That's the final answer. that's why we do this show, boys and girls.
Oh, but yeah, I think but I do think that like having so few roasters with so many shops that have been doing it for 30 years or 20 years, like in the case of Aidan, is kind of exceptional. You don't really see that. So I sort of wonder why that wasn't noticed.
Right. It seems like there's no real answer, and I guess that's the only conclusion that we can come to.
Yeah.
Colin Whitcomb, last big one for you.
Okay.
Positioning for the future. How does it look for, you know, both your shop alone and you think the greater, you know, city market here as well?
Okay. Well, yeah, I think
that's a pack.
There's obviously some level of disruption that's happening in the industry right now, and it's really tough to know necessarily what that's going to be. But I'm feeling really confident that that's what it is. Like, places are closing now permanently, and I think that more places are going to close. I think that a lot of people have been able to broker something with their landlord that they're not going to be able to fulfill on their end, and end up closing in the next 6 or 12 months. So what I think, I don't know, my prediction for the industry at large, and I guess I think I'd predict the same for here, is that you're going to see it go like this, right? Where like the bottom is going to like push down almost and be like whatever, and the top is going to push up.
So tons of disparity.
Tons of differentiation, I think, like is going to be where people are going to try to like to stand out and like find a way to like say that we're different than everybody else, and this is your reason for coming here. I think that's partly because of like supply chain issues in coffee. The whole coffee supply chain has been hugely disrupted and has been undergoing a level of disruption because of this disparity in the like the cost of production, what it costs to produce coffee versus what people want to pay for coffee. And right. So like the most for the most part, like but the big multinationals are paying for coffee isn't covering the cost of production. 80% of the world's coffee is grown by single producing families. They're not big wealthy estates, and they can't keep up. So in that way, it looks to me as if at origin, you're going to start to see like larger farms in certain parts of the world produce these commodity coffees or these low grade specialty coffees, and then like the very best coffees will be produced by these like single families that are like able to invest the money into doing all the work, creating all the infrastructure to have, you know, truly exceptional coffees, and that could even get better than they are now, right? I think a lot of us believe that there's even space that in 25 years you could taste coffees that literally are more pleasant, maybe more sweet, that are less bitter, whatever the case may be, but they're going to become more and more expensive to produce, right? And so we're going to have to adapt our retail spaces to keep up with that. That's always been part of the idea behind Canary, right? That coffee is going to cost more in the future. And like, if we continue to only like offer people, like the value of coming here is only in like the product that we offer, like there is no experience. It's literally just line up and get something. We knew we had to create something that felt like it offered more. That if we told you your coffee was $6, it felt like it was worth $6. So that, because otherwise you're only left saying to people like, this is worth $6 if you understand like everything about like the cost of production, everything from what we call seed to cup, from the coffee seed to it goes in your cup. Like you have to understand all those things, and then you'll understand why the coffee is worth $6. Which means absorbing all this arcane knowledge. So, yeah, I kind of think you're going to see these roasters that offer coffee at a very, very, very low price, like almost criminally low price, like Valentine and Fiddleheads become more successful, and you're going to see a contraction from Anodyne. You've already seen they closed 2 locations permanently, both their market locations, and whether Stone Creek will or not, it's hard to say. And a contraction from Colectivo too, and then what I'm getting a sense is you're going to see then more stuff like Interval, Wonder State, Canary Coffee Bar, stuff like that, right? So that's kind of what I think is going to happen, and then there'll be those people that, like,
what a save.
There'll be those people that those Colectivos and Stone Creeks and Anodynes that will keep their locations and hold out that middle session coffee. I do think that was like one of the more brilliant marketing like things that has been done, like to market the coffee as session coffee, really helps people locate what it is. So those like sessionable coffees will be there, but I that's kind of what I think. So yeah, all my ire is building up towards those people who are offering coffee at a very low price.
as you potentially predict the future here.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard because like I'm not a business person, and like traditionally coffee sales have been seen as elastic, right? Where like people will just go to a place where like it's the same, coffee's the same everywhere. To me, it's coffee. If it's cheaper,
right,
that's all that matters. And I think we're trying to say like, no, we think people do care. So I really hope that is in fact the case. Because I do think that there are people out there that are hoping to make a success on offering something that is so much less than what it actually is.
I love it. Just the nature of being independent, which you mentioned a couple of places. You mentioned Interval, your place, Wonder State. Obviously, Wonder State only having one Milwaukee cafe. Becoming independent and kind of shutting down those ideas for a second location. Was that, I know you mentioned earlier, was it difficult, or did you not have to think twice about it?
Oh, well, I mean, for us to do a second location right now would make no sense. Like, I think just in terms, like, I mean, of course it's hard to think we're not going to do it for a while, but just like,
right.
On the other hand, like, it's just not, when the business doesn't create enough revenue right now to save up to do a second location. So it's like, whatever, If
Right.
it did, then it would be great. But you've got to have money to put into something. As we, it's sort of, as you learn pretty quickly, no one's going to fund a business unless you have something to put into it yourself, right?
Right.
Other than your blood, sweat, and tears.
Marquette business major. I've learned a little bit in my 3 years.
It is sort of funny because I remember when you first have those conversations and people say to you, like, you have something to put in, right? And you're like, oh, no, I do. And then they're all relieved, like, oh, thank God. Like, and so I guess I assumed in the end that people must go to a bank and say, like, hey, I have a business plan. I want to start a business. And people say, like, what do you have to put in? And they say nothing. So I don't know. Maybe not. What do I know? So yeah, that's my prediction for the future of Milwaukee is like more differentiation, but
a little bit more disparity.
A little bit more
lows
disparity.
of the lows,
It's
highs.
like such an open thing because like there's all this office space downtown that's going to be empty supposedly, but like you would think that the market would adapt to that. They're going to find a way to use that space that's going to bring people into that space. And that would bring people back into downtowns. So we'll see.
We will see. Well, Colin, 2 rapid fire ones to wrap up with.
Okay.
First one, your menu. Do you have a favorite drink on it right now?
All I drink is espresso and black coffee. I don't drink any of the same drink.
So where does that creativity come from then?
Oh, well, like the desire to have like people, this idea that people have these different need states, right? Like they come in and they're like, oh, I need to be refreshed. I need to be comforted. I need to, whatever it is. So to have a drink to fit into all those spots. And then, yeah, there was some market research done I think for a long time, and I was a big part of this in specialty coffee too. It was like the idea seemed to be that like we should get everybody to drink black coffee to understand like the tasting notes of the coffee, to drink coffee and appreciate it like you would drink wine or beer, and the textural qualities, what is the acidity like of the coffee. And you could drink that, or you could drink the single origin as espresso, or you could drink short milk drinks. And that really what we should be doing is like making everybody happy, but slowly trying to be like, hey, have you tried drinking your coffee without vanilla? And then, hey, have you tried drinking your coffee in an 8-ounce size? And then, hey, have you just ever tried espresso? Or, right, just like, if they weren't doing that, then they weren't going to be happy. But there was some strong market research that showed that like people love specialty coffee. They love going to specialty coffee shops, and they will never drink anything except like a vanilla latte, right? And so I found that in particular to be like this very freeing idea. Like, oh my God, we don't have to do this really uncomfortable thing, which people don't want.
It could be customized.
To tell people like, oh, it's better this, or like, oh, you want that? Those are okay. So that we would embrace this idea of having like, hey, let's have all these different interesting coffee drinks that pair with the coffee interestingly, like lavender or something like that, that can almost suggest these things about coffee. Coffee's culinary. Coffee has different notes to it without us having to tell people that, right? And they still get to have their great latte experience. So I think that was sort of the genesis of like the seasonal menu being as robust as it is, like wanting to meet those need states, and then also really wanting to like cater to that crowd of people that wants to like wants to drink a vanilla latte but wants to go to a shop where they prepare it by hand. They don't want to just get shoved off to Starbucks like, oh, you only drink vanilla lattes, well just go to Starbucks then. They're like, what? I love going to a local shop. I love watching you make it. I like seeing you pour latte art on top. Right.
It's so interesting, that the whole, the concept of customization, and even more interesting that you're only espresso and black guy, but have only drinking espresso and black coffee. I think just owning a shop, I don't think many would think that of an owner and even of yourself as well.
You sip a lot of drinks, and like sort of like you're at a cocktail bar, you sip a lot of drinks, you taste a lot of drinks. I think it's important to know what things taste like so that you can sell it to people and not like guide people to making the right choice. But yeah, for me, those are just what I got into, I guess.
Hey, to each their own.
Yeah.
And then last one, Was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted me to get to, or any shout outs, anything like that?
Oh, no. We're good.
I think we got it all.
Yeah, we talked about some interesting stuff, I think, for sure.
All right. Well, Colin Whitcomb, Canary Coffee Bar. I appreciate it. This was a blast. Like I said, you've been a personal savior of mine. Personal, getting work done at the coffee shop has been a passion of mine ever since coming to Canary. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Aidan. You're awesome, as always.